Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our National Safety Month Week 3 live stream. Our Week 3 is brought to us by QBE Insurance, a long-term safety sponsor of RAAUS. This week's live stream, we have Mike Hutchinson joining us from BAVS Consulting. Mike has over 40 years experience within the aviation industry, including roles within the Royal Australian Air Force and the SMS and Human Factors Manager at CASA. Mike has actually carried out some consultancy work with RAAUS in the past with his business, and I can certainly personally recommend Mike as a mentor and a consultant in the safety management space. If you have a business and you're looking to improve your safety management systems, certainly reach out to Mike, who has a wealth of experience in the space. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our National Safety Month sponsors who have allowed us to carry out National Safety Month with $10,000 worth of prizes throughout the month of October. We certainly couldn't have done it without the assistance of our sponsors, and we're really happy with how National Safety Month has come together. And thank you also to everyone who's been participating. We've had over 800 submissions now into our weekly quizzes. Please stay involved and continue with loss of control, our focus for next week's live stream and our content for next week. I'd also like to congratulate our live stream winner from last week, who has won a 12-month RAAUS membership, and the winner from last week's live stream is Brody Veal. We will be in touch with you, Brody. In relation to this week's live quiz, if you are joining us from Facebook or YouTube directly, if you go to the RAAUS website, you will see the submission entry for this week's quiz. It is aimed at instructors for this week, but it does also give an extra entry in the draw for our Open Safety Prize Pack. And for current RAAUS instructors, we're giving away $500 worth of sponsorship for personal development. So without further ado, I will introduce Mike. Good evening, Mike.
Hey, Cody, how are you?
Not too bad, thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, very well. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for joining us. And on that note, I will pass over to you. And just a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, please submit those online and we will have a question and answer session if there are any questions at the end of Mike's presentation. Handing over, Mike.
Thanks, Cody, and many thanks to RAAUS for the opportunity to participate in National Safety Month. So this evening, what I'd like to do is try and demystify to a certain extent safety management systems in aviation. So a bit of an agenda that I've got for you tonight. Slight difference between work health and safety and SMS, and a quick discussion there. Talk about an SMS framework, but to component level only. I'll only dive into 3 of the elements. Safety culture, I'll spend a bit of time talking about safety culture, and I'll also spend a little bit of time talking about RAAUS and SMS and some of the things that they've been putting together for their organisations. Some clear benefits of SMS that I've seen. I've been involved with SMS now since around 2003, both in defence, in the civil aviation sector, and also with the regulator. Indicators of a healthy SMS. So what are we actually looking for? And what do we mean by healthy? And then I'll leave you with some final thoughts to take away. And as Cody said, I'm more than happy to be approached for any questions you may have in this space, and happy to provide any input to any drama that you may have in the SMS space. I've got some references for you this evening. Professor James Reason, I take a lot of his work, seminal work indeed, after Piper Alpha. He's professor at Manchester University. Yoshida, who some of you may know, put together the Iceberg of Ignorance research paper, and we'll discuss some of that a bit later. Professor Patrick Hudson, who also worked with James Reason on the Piper Alpha safety case issues after the Cullen report, but he heads up the Human Factors Institute within Delft University in the Netherlands. CASA have got an excellent resource material bank on their website, but also the UK CAA, who I have been involved directly with. The UK CAA, I personally believe, and this is just my thoughts, are really leading the way when it comes to SMS globally at the moment. The SMICG, the Safety Management International Collaboration Group, which I was very proud to be a steering committee member for a few years, who have put together quite a few research papers on the Skybury website, and some of their research and information around SMS is very valid. And also, of course, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organisation's Safety Management Manual, and the condensed version of safety management under Annex 19. So here are the references that I use. There is some of my stuff in here as well, but predominantly a lot of the material comes from these sources here. So I'd like to just touch on the traditional approach in what we call the bad old days, perhaps, and where we want to go in this space when we talk about safety, is that it was very much a focus on accident prevention. Safety was seen as very much a technical issue. It focused on cause. And can I just say that cause is very much a psychological construct. It's not a technical term. So when we start talking what caused something, in our space now, we talk about contributing factors. So there is a significant difference there. It was very much the case to blame and punish for failure to perform safely. And we always ask the question, who was involved, what happened and when? Nowadays, what we try to focus on, which is quite difficult for some, is why did something happen and how? And this is where we want to get to. Can I just say, for any event, there will always be a who, so we need to focus on the why and the how. So why SMS? It was said through the SMM, again, that air transportation industry's future viability may well be predicated on its ability to sustain the public's perceived safety while travelling. The management of safety is therefore a prerequisite for a sustainable aviation business. This was said in around 2016, I believe. Obviously, in today's environment, it has been quite difficult for aviation viability with the COVID crisis. However, ICAO have noted that there is a requirement for aviation to have some sort of management system to manage safety. The difference between work health and safety, a quality management system, and a safety management system. And typically, a work health and safety, we're looking after the people in our workplace. We have a duty of care, and depending where you work in Australia, there is differing state legislation around work health and safety or operational health and safety. A QMS, a quality management system, is purely compliance-based. It focuses on the product, whereas an SMS is performance-based. There is some compliance with SMS, but what we tend to focus on now, thankfully, is how is the system performing? How is it working? Is it delivering the outcomes that you're after? And the overarching aviation safety system is under the Civil Aviation Act. So there are some differences there. So when we talk about work health and safety versus SMS, it probably wasn't helped by ICAO having some different definitions around what is a hazard. And I'll talk a bit more about that now. There is still some confusion in the aviation industry about what a hazard is. Now, typically when we want people to report, I personally don't care what people report. They can report whatever they like. However, what we need to do then is distinguish, well, is that a work health and safety issue or is it an aviation safety issue? And then there needs to be a bit of a line between the two. In the past, Annex 19, the first edition that came out, a hazard was defined as something that has the potential to cause harm. Nowadays, with the second edition in 2016, a hazard is defined as a condition or an object with the potential to cause or contribute to an aircraft incident or accident. So there is a definite difference between a hazard that can cause harm or a hazard that can cause an aviation accident. And what we look at in the SMS space is the latter. the aviation hazards. So when we want to know what we want our people to report or how to report, it is something that has the potential to cause or contribute to an aircraft incident or accident when we start talking about aviation hazards. So a quick definition from safety, state in which risk of harm to persons or property damage is reduced to and maintained at or below an acceptable level. And we hear the term ALARP, through a continuing process of hazard identification and risk management. Again, ICAO, and typically a lot of people in some sort of safety space believe that hazard identification and risk management is the heart and soul of a safety management system. I hope to change your mind by the end of the talk this evening, because while it is an integral part of an SMS, it doesn't drive it forwards. And I'll talk more about that as we go. So some aviation safety issues here. When we start looking at an example like this, typically a helicopter pilot who knows how to fly a helicopter wouldn't just go and do this event or what's going on here. There would need to be significant risk mitigation put in place. The pilot would need to be trained in flying in a close environment or flying in a wire environment, for example. They would need to be trained in hovering the aircraft fairly close to structures. There would need to be some wind considerations there. You wouldn't go and do this in 40 knots of crosswind, and you certainly wouldn't do an event like this, in the evening or midnight, for example. It'd have to be 10/10 blue, daylight hours, less than 5 knots of wind, people fully trained, helicopter serviceable before flight. All of these sort of considerations need to be put in place before you actually go flying. So that's what I mean when I start talking about aviation safety. We're looking at aviation hazards that could actually affect the safety of the mission. So SMS, another definition for you: systematic approach to managing safety. We need some structure, some accountabilities, policies and procedures. So basically it's method in your madness in the safety space. And again, that's straight out of the ICAO Safety Management Manual, if you want a definition of what an SMS is. All right, there is a framework. ICAO, through Annex 19 and also the Safety Management Manual, have given us 4 components and 12 elements to work with. The Civil Aviation Safety Authority of Australia, we have the same 4 components, but we have 15 elements. We've added 3 extra elements. In the fullness of time, whenever this may be, hopefully we will revert back to 12, but at the moment, under current legislation, there are 15 elements within an SMS in Australia. So the ICAO and CASA SMS frameworks. The first component, safety policy and objectives. The second is safety risk management. The third component is safety assurance. And the last component is safety promotion. So there are the 4 components that make up our SMS. Now, ICAO have actually put together this diagram, and they call it the 4 pillars of SMS. Again, you can see that we have safety policy and objectives, safety risk management, safety assurance and safety promotion. They are integrated. We don't just view one of these components in isolation. They actually integrate with the others, and this comes underneath the banner of a safety management system. Now, that's all very well and good, but what I'd like to draw your attention to is this bit down the bottom here, the culture and values. So when we start talking about SMS, when we start talking about, well, what holds all of this stuff together, it is really the culture within the organisation. So culture. Now, when we start talking about culture, we can talk about national culture. We can talk about religious culture. We can talk about professional culture, the difference between the way air traffic control and pilots interact, maintenance engineers and ground handlers, baggage handlers, whatever, okay, professional culture within aviation. We've got organisational cultures, the difference between, say, a large regular public transport operator and an offshore helicopter company, for example, would have a different organisational culture. But what we're on the hook for, particularly when we start talking about SMS, is safety culture. And there's been a lot of material written and put together specifically around safety culture. And this is the glue that actually holds your SMS together. Without safety culture and without some other stuff that I'll talk about in the future, you will not have an SMS. So when we start talking about a safety culture, James Reason believes that's the way we do things around here. And I believe that to be the case from what I've seen in my experience. The way I like to put it, though, is, and I saw Pete Ball's presentation the other night, last week, how when he starts talking about airmanship, when we start talking about professionally conducting ourselves at work, the way we go about doing things, it's how we behave when no one else is watching. And all of that, I believe, can come under the same banner as safety culture. So James Reason, or ideal safety culture is one that is supportive of systems and staff at work. It recognises that errors will be made. Apportionment of blame will not resolve the problems. So within an SMS, when we have senior management, senior managers need to realise that people are going to make mistakes. Regardless of the best system, the best training, we will still have people that make mistakes in the workplace, be it in the cockpit of an aircraft, be it in the hangar, be it out on the flight line. We will still have mistakes. And our best people can sometimes make the worst mistakes, regrettably. The supportive culture encourages open reporting. We seek to learn from failures, and then we need to be just in dealing with those involved. And can I just say that if we get this just bit wrong, we will cruel our SMS in a heartbeat. So I'll talk a bit more about just culture in a minute. So safety culture itself. Positive safety culture is a fundamental component of a healthy SMS. And we saw that with the 4-pillar diagram that was provided by ICAO earlier. It's shaped by the safety attitudes, beliefs, behaviours and values of employees in an organisation. That was put together through a trifold publication by the SMICG earlier this year, where they've actually got their own definition around safety culture, and it's a good read. It's on the Skybury website. So, elements of a safety culture. There are 5 specific elements to a safety culture in an organisation: an informed culture, a learning culture, a flexible culture, some sort of reporting culture, and a just culture. And we'll break these down bit by bit. And in managing the risks of the organisational accident, James Reason actually goes into each one of these components bit by bit, and also explains how to engineer each. We won't do that tonight, but I'll just touch on it. Can I just say, the reason I focus so much on culture and SMS is, as I said earlier, this is the glue that holds your SMS together. If you don't have a positive safety culture, or you're striving towards having a positive safety culture in your organisation, then it's probably pointless trying to put an SMS together. So an informed culture, and this is where those who manage and operate the system, and we talk about our safety management system, have current knowledge about the human, technical, organisational, environmental factors that determine the system as a whole. So what's actually going on? And how do we disseminate that information? And the way we get that is through data, through safety investigation, hazard reports, and then we need to let people know. So if we've had a significant event in our organisation, there is an investigation that's been carried out either by RAAUS or by internally or by the HSB or whatever, we really need to share those outcomes, particularly in the small organisations. We need to keep people informed. And as I'll talk about with Patrick Hudson coming up, if we keep people informed, we actually build trust. It's not seen as a witch hunt. There have been contributing factors to an event. As a result of those contributing factors, we now have recommendations. As a result of those recommendations, we will now change our processes, procedures, and maybe tweak our SMS if the changes are required. So an informed culture. This is an interesting diagram, and I talked about Yoshida earlier, the iceberg of ignorance. And if we have a look at the top here, we see 4% of problems are known to top management, whereas we really need to know the truth in an organisation. Then how about we go and talk to the engineers in the hangar, or we talk to the line pilots in the flight ops area, go and talk to our flight ops dispatchers or our maintainers, whoever, if we really want to know what's going on in the organisation. Now, Yoshida looked at organisations as a whole, Whether or not the numbers stack up is beside the point, in my view. The key point to take away from this diagram is that there is a breakdown between the rank and file and senior management. And typically when I go and speak to organisations about SMS, my target audience has always been and will always be middle level managers, because they have the means to be able to change procedures and invite open communication throughout the differing levels. Messages may be sent out from the CEO down to the rank and file and they're not getting there. The rank and file may be raising issues that just don't get to the CEO. Now, a key point that I'd like to just draw your attention to here, how about we think about the top 4% as being RAAUS, the organisation that is the umbrella under which, as a self-administering aviation organisation, have all of the flying schools beneath it. Now, RAAUS doesn't know what they don't know. So if flying schools having events or incidents happen that aren't being reported, then RAAUS just does not know about this. And so where's the breakdown? And we can talk more about that as we go along. But it's a good diagram, this. I use it regularly when I speak to, like I said, organisations, and that's why the regulator would like to see the safety manager embedded within the senior management ranks, or the middle level management ranks in your supervisor ranks, hopefully. And that way they're the conduit between the CEO and also the rank and file. So a learning culture. And this is where we learn from our mistakes. Hopefully something's happened, so we do something about it to ensure the same thing doesn't happen again. The willingness and competence to draw the right conclusions from the data that we collect through hazard reports or safety investigations. Competence is a big one here. A lot of times we focus too much on the who and not enough on the why. The will to implement major reforms when their need is indicated. And again, when we say willingness and will, what we're focusing on here is, well, senior management need to do something about things. If things are being reported or we have incidents happen, we need to make sure that they don't happen again. So obviously something needs to change. We need to either change a procedure, a process, our training, whatever. But there needs to be will to implement these changes as a result. A flexible culture is once where it's the ability to adapt to changes in the environment without compromising safety standards. So if all of a sudden we've got 40 aircraft in the circuit at once, how do we manage that without compromising any safety standards? Air traffic control. If you imagine the air traffic control in Heathrow, once that runway is shut, where does all the traffic go as the biggest or the most busiest airport in Europe? So these are sorts of things we talk about when we talk about a flexible culture. Operational tempo may increase. We need to adapt to the changing tempo and then revert to normal. We need to be flexible in our approach without compromising any standards. Reporting culture we've spoken about or touched on. We really rely on the trust of the reporters. There needs to be trust in the system and the outcomes from the report. So if someone does put their hand up, we don't take out a big stick and thump them with it. We actually find out, well, why did that occur? And then outcomes of the report. And if there is a hazard report, we need to then provide feedback to the originator, and I'll talk about that. But people are willing to report mistakes or near misses without fear of retribution. And this is the key. If people are scared to report, if they fear for their job, if they fear for their license, then they're not going to report. It's as simple as that. And yet reporting is part of our SMS, and it's something that we need to foster. How do we do that? Well, how about we have a reporting system that's easy to use? It's pointless giving me as a flight engineer 5 pages of a hazard report to fill out. It needs to be simple and easy to use. And I believe RAAUS provides that through their website and their portal. And each school or organisation underneath RAAUS should have some sort of reporting system that then feeds into that. So it needs to be simple and easy to use. If we receive a hazard report, then we need to provide the feedback to the originator of the report. Thank you for your report. We've received it. At the moment, we can't do anything. We'll raise it at the next Safety Action Group meeting, or we'll raise this with senior management, and I'll get back to you when we know the way forward, for example. But the reporter must receive some sort of feedback for any hazard report. If they don't, and then they put in another one and they still don't hear anything, then they're not going to report. So we need to encourage that reporting. We need a fully transparent investigation process, because some reports may trigger a safety investigation. So what does that mean? What is the process that's going to be used? And this needs to be fully transparent. So part of the induction training into your SMS needs to include safety investigation, the process, and what happens as a result. There also needs to be a cutoff, I guess, based on risk, on what hazard reports an organisation will investigate and what they will use as just data or business as usual. And that's up to each individual organisation to determine what that cutoff would be. Investigations must be conducted to learn and improve, not to apportion blame. We won't learn anything by firing people as an organisation, because people will not report stuff. If Blogs gets fired for putting his hand up for an honest mistake, by leaving a nose pin in or whatever, and gets fired for it, then unfortunately it has a negative effect on your reporting. So while sometimes for a willful disregard of rules and regulations may incur disciplinary action, most of the time hazard reports will say, thank you for your report. As a result of your report, we've now implemented X, Y, Z, and off we go. But if there needs to be an investigation, it is how to change things so that we learn from our mistakes. Again, feeding into that learned culture. And we need to share recommendations and outcomes from the investigation. Again, we're building that trust and we're keeping people informed. Just culture. Before I go into this, if we get this wrong, completely off the mark, you will cruel not only your reporting, but also your SMS. So this is the way we treat people in the organisation. An atmosphere of trust where people are encouraged for providing safety-related information. There needs to be an agreed set of principles that outline the line between acceptable and unacceptable behaviour and how to deal justly with those involved. And this is not no blame, and it is certainly not a blame culture. What it means is that if someone has gone and there has been an event as a result of a procedure that was incorrect, or the procedure was there but just wasn't followed, then we need to do the investigation first. We need to find out why this event actually happened, and then if there needs to be any action taken as a result of unacceptable behaviour, then so be it. But people need to know about this straight up front. We just can't go and fire people for raising their hand or bending an aeroplane, for example, unless it is, of course, a willful violation or a total disregard of rules and procedures. Regrettably, in aviation, as in most high reliability organisations, again, we can have the best systems in place, we can have the best training in place, but for some reason, we just can't fix stupid. There will always be someone who will go and just break the rules. And then how do we deal with them? And however we deal with them, it needs to be consistent across the board. And here's reasons breakdown of an informed culture, a reporting culture, a just culture, flexible culture, and a learning culture, which all feed into your safety culture, which again, I'll reiterate, is the glue that holds your SMS together. It is very hard to legislate culture. So you won't see this in any legislation, but it is the glue that holds it together. And that's why I want to come back to that ICAO 4 pillars. Just don't forget about the culture and values at the bottom. Now, Patrick Hudson has come up with, well, how do we get to where we want to get to with our safety culture? And what I really like about this diagram is that you can see on the left-hand side here as we keep people increasingly informed, we actually build that trust. And if we build trust in the workforce, our culture will improve. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Typically in Australia, we don't see any pathological organisations out there, hopefully. Haven't seen too many. Reactive, so we do stuff when stuff happens, is being reactive. Calculative, we've got some systems in place to deal with stuff when it happens. Proactive, we use our systems to look forwards, and then a generative safety culture, which Hudson piggybacks on the back of James Reason here by saying safety is how we do business around here. Now, I tend to think, and I'm happy to discuss further offline, that a generative safety culture is something that we actually strive for. Will we ever get there? Possibly not, but it's something that we try to strive for. It's an ideal. I'll tell you now, out of the hundreds of organisations that I've worked with within SMS in Australia and also around Asia Pacific and New Zealand, I have found one organisation that I would call proactive. And it's not a large organisation, it's a smaller organisation. There are quite a few that would be calculative, but most organisations are between reactive and calculative. So if you struggle in this space to build your safety culture, if you're struggling with your systems to get them working, you're not alone, okay? So typically, organisations are quite reactive in this space until they get the hang of using the system to help them. All right, so some indicators of a positive safety culture. So when I walk into an organisation and I want to, I can ask people, how's your safety culture? And I'll certainly get some answers. But management actively encourage reporting of any safety issues. So senior management are out there actively encouraging people to report. Safety is seen as a shared responsibility. The RAAUS safety team aren't the people that look after safety in your organisation. You do. It's a shared responsibility. It's not the safety manager that looks after safety in a large RPT operation or in a helicopter operation. It's everybody in that organisation. Safety should be seen as a shared responsibility. There's regular safety conversations between all levels within the organisation. So a regular safety day or a stand down time or a Friday afternoon where everyone gets together and it just has a quick chat about what's going on in the safety space. And unsafe behaviour is dealt with in a fair and consistent manner. And this is what I mean about transparency, particularly with your safety investigation process, but also treating people justly for honest mistakes or people that report an error, a mistake, and it could also be a routine violation. Disciplinary action may not apply. But for a willful disregard of rules, regulations and procedures, then disciplinary action may apply. So there is that line in the sand. Now, RAAUS and SMS, just a quick chat about this. RAAUS will eventually, in the fullness of time, be certified under CASA Part 149, which has within it some SMS requirements, those 4 components and 15 elements that I talked about earlier. RAAUS will be certified as a self-administering aviation organisation. Therefore, they will be blessed by the regulator to provide oversight to approximately 160 flying schools. So this is quite a big deal for RAAUS, the 149 certification. Now, what that means is that if RAAUS under 149 is required to have an SMS, it also means that flying schools underneath the RAAUS banner will also be required to have an SMS. And I know that RAAUS has actually provided that information to the schools. But their key SMS elements that they are looking for is the safety policy, an emergency response plan, and the hazard and risk register. Now, remember when I spoke about hazards earlier, something that has the potential to cause harm is probably a work health and safety hazard. So if you have a hazard and risk register and you want to have security hazards in there, environmental hazards, go for it. But also have a section that's separate to delineate between those hazards and an aviation hazard. something that has the potential to cause or contribute to an aircraft incident or accident. So some key points about your safety policy. Typically, a safety policy underpins the SMS and is the safety vision for the organisation. Less is more. Again, being a flight engineer, I don't want to go and read 5 pages of a safety policy. Thanks very much. And I tend to think that a 1-page, 5 bullet points would typically cover off on the smaller organisations around the place. So less is more. This is what, it underpins your SMS. This is the safety vision. Please do not have any motherhood statements in there. I just don't want to read, and I know the regulator won't want to read, safety is our #1 priority, because while it sounds nice, folks, safety is not your #1 priority. For any flying school, for any aviation organisation, the bottom line should be and remains your priority. Now, in saying that, safety enables that. So I would like to think that while safety is important, it's not your #1 priority. It enables your business. So no motherhood statements. Your safety policy needs to be visible and it needs to be readable. Plain language, and it needs to be put up either in the hangar, in the flight, in flight ops, in admin, whatever. But it needs to be seen around the organisation. It also needs to be signed by the accountable manager. This is his or her commitment to safety for the organisation. It is, to me, a sign of significant management commitment. So it should also mention just culture. A line like, we support and encourage reporting for open and honest mistakes, and carried on from there. If you need examples of safety policies, again, CASA has an SMS resource kit that is available on the website. It's available through their online store. There's some excellent examples in there. Your emergency response plan, some key points about that. The emergency response plan is not an evacuation plan. It's not what you do in the event of the hangar being on fire or the admin office being on fire. It's around an aviation incident or accident. And therefore, so when is the plan activated? When will you activate your emergency response plan? Is it an aircraft overdue by 1 hour? If you get a phone call saying, we've just seen an aircraft have some sort of event somewhere, what actually causes that emergency response plan to be activated? It needs to, I'll just go back here. The ERP needs to reflect the size and complexity of the organisation, must define procedures, roles and responsibilities, who's going to do what when, and it needs to be periodically tested to ensure relevance and effectiveness. And the easiest way to do that is once every 12 months, sit down, have the key players around a desk. Can I just say a desk is your best tool for doing one of these periodic testing of your ERP, and just have a what if. What if we have an aircraft overdue by 2 hours? What happens if that propeller that we just serviced in the hangar is on an aircraft that's now missing? How do we go about quarantining procedures? Who do we call with respect to ambulance or ATSB? Does the regulator need to be involved? Who do we actually call? And it's easy to do this around a desk. So some key points about your ERP. Now, some further points for consideration, and this is lessons learnt from myself, I must admit, is who's going to speak to the media? So if your organisation is involved in a significant event, who will speak to the media? And if they haven't had media training, it's a good bet not to. The nominated person that you have to speak to the media needs to have some sort of media training. If you don't have someone in your organisation that has been trained in talking to the media, please outsource it. Get a third party to do this on your behalf. Have a written statement prepared and have a third party deliver that to the media. Are there provisions for grief counselling for your staff? Now, in small organisations, particularly with fatalities or serious injuries, we need to think about some grief counselling. The two 300-pound gorillas at the back of the room that no one wants to talk about with aviation safety is fatigue, and the other one is mental health. We just don't talk about it. However, we need to do something about it. So have some consideration for other people in the organisation should something like this occur, and what are you going to do in the event of? What will happen to phones, website or social media in the event the ERP is activated? In these days of mobile phones that have brilliant cameras and we've got them wired up for everything, you know, it's more likely that the press will get hold of something off Facebook before the CEO is aware. So what will actually occur? What's the process or policy around the phones or your website, social media in the event that your ERP is activated? So just some things to think about. Okay, so your hazard register, some key points. The senior management aware of the organisation's biggest risks? Simple question. And if they are aware of the biggest risks, are they documented? Because that's what we want to see in the hazard and risk register. RAAUS has provided a template, and therefore it's up to each organisation to then think about and start small. I don't want to see 100 hazards that you're dealing with, unless it's a mature system. Start with 2 or 3. Have a significant think about what are the biggest risks that we face, and having a look at the data from RAAUS, I would have to say that what are you doing about loss of control in flight, and noting that it is one of the organisation's biggest risks at the moment. Is the risk register periodically reviewed? Are controls that you've put in place, like training, stand down days, there may be other controls that you put in place. If there's RPT operations into your airfield and you're up training, have you broken that down into specific times when you go training so you don't have a 737 barreling into the circuit while you're trying to do stuff? How do you manage that? So it needs to be documented. So, and it also needs to be reviewed. Is it still relevant? Do those controls still work? And are the controls monitored for effectiveness? Now, in the early stages of setting up your SMS, this is a bridge too far. I understand that, but you've got to start somewhere. And that's why I say don't have 100 hazards in your hazard register. Have 5 to 10 of the biggest risks that you face, and what are you doing about them? And there's 5 key questions that we can ask here is, what is your biggest risk? Sorry, 4. What is your biggest risk? How do you know? What are you doing about it? And is it working? 4 key questions, something to think about. But those, whatever are those biggest risks, they need to be documented. And that's what we have the hazard and risk register for. The other thing is, are risk tolerability levels clearly defined? So if you do a risk assessment and it is a risk level of X, Y, or Z, who can sign off for that? And it shouldn't be the pilot and it shouldn't be the engineer. This needs to be elevated. If a risk assessment has been done, where it is outside a certain level, then the CEO needs to be aware of this. So risk tolerability levels, who can sign for what? All right, now, indicators of management commitment. In the first component, which is safety policy and objectives, the number 1 element is senior management commitment, top level commitment. So what are some indicators of top level commitment? And before I go on, management commitment and safety culture drive your SMS. Without management commitment, you will not have an SMS. Without safety culture, you will not have an SMS. So they go hand in glove. All right, so adequacy of resources allocated. So are our people trained? Do we have the right equipment? Do we have the right people in the job, And what sort of training are we providing? So are there resources being allocated? Do we have an appropriate management structure? Do we have a safety manager, for example, or is he also the chief pilot and CEO? So is this person triple-hatted in this job? And I would say that's probably inappropriate in a lot of organisations. What's the clear reporting structure? Who reports to who? What happens in the event of our emergency response plan? Who does what when? Some other indicators, there need to be assigned responsibilities and accountabilities, some defined duties, who's responsible for what. There needs to be some understood documented procedures, and that can be throughout your SMS. For example, a safety investigation process. it needs to be documented. Well, who's going to do the safety investigation? What process are they going to use? What's going to happen as a result of the investigation being carried out? Evidence of walking the walk. It is very easy to sit in the ivory tower and say, do this, do that. But unless you're leading by example, it's not going to work. Which brings me on to a lovely little acronym, which I should have given to Cody to put into the exam, but it's called BBWA. For all the CEOs or senior managers watching this presentation, you need to do more of this. It's business by walking about. This is where we need to get out of our office, leave our clipboards in the office, and just go and have a chat to people. How are people tracking? And again, this breaks down that barrier that I highlighted earlier with the Yoshida diagram, the iceberg of ignorance. What breaks down that communication barrier? So it's good to get out of our office occasionally and go and have a chat to people. And also driving the safety culture. It starts at the top, folks. So without some senior management commitment, we won't have a safety culture either. So some SMS flexibility. Now, industry and the regulator do struggle with this, both of them, when we say that an SMS needs to be flexible. It needs to be tailored to the size and complexity of the organisation. A large RPT operator, SMS won't work for a helicopter company. And yet the helicopter company will have 4 components and 15 elements, and so will the large RPT operator. The detail of each element will be different, and it's the same. You need to build an SMS specifically for your organisation. There is no off-the-shelf SMS that will work for you. And then what we need to ask is, well, is what we've built actually delivering the expected outcomes? Can I just say that if you're a small organisation and you have 5 manuals for your emergency response plan, I tend to think it's an overkill. How about we keep it simple? Is what you've built delivering the expected outcomes? And if a process that you're using that you think is too complex, simplify it, please. People need to use this. So some clear benefits. A key one for me, it's a proactive focus on protection. We talk about production and protection and the weighing up of the scales that CEOs need to do, but this is a proactive, it provides you with a proactive focus on protection. We get the discussion going. Facilitates cultural change. We want people to start changing their behaviour. We want people to put their hand up and start reporting stuff, and we need to encourage that. Hopefully, we will see a reduction in direct costs, incidents, aircraft and component damage through people reporting. And also, we'll see a reduction in indirect costs. Insurance, legal claims and loss of business is a big one. I'll talk a little bit more about loss of business in a minute. Some other clear benefits. It provides structure. We've got a framework to work with here. It's not a management system that's out in the ether. It's 4 components and 15 elements. And a pro tip for you is that your SMS manual should have four chapters with 15 breakdown points as your index. So it provides some structure for you. It also provides corporate memory. When we start talking about your hazard and risk register, I said start small and then build. And then we start judging the effectiveness of the controls that we put in place. So it provides some sort of corporate memory. How did we get here? And when we start talking about the management of change, how did we do this last time? Oh, we bought a new aircraft. What were the hazards that were associated with buying that new aircraft? So you had a proactive look at that, but that's now in the record. So you can go back and revisit that. New tooling, same thing. So it provides corporate memory. And the big one, really, something to think about, is that it protects your brand. If there is a history of events, aircraft incidents, accidents, you're not going to be in business very long. So really, some of this proactive looking forwards in a structured way, having a systematic way of managing safety actually will protect your brand. All right, so what are some indicators of a healthy SMS? And I tend to think from the way the presentation's gone, you could draw your own conclusions. We see safety as a shared responsibility. There's open two-way communication throughout the organisation. When you walk into the hangar and you say to the people on the hangar floor, when was the last time the CEO walked through here? And they say, oh yeah, no, he comes through every week or she comes through every day, whatever. So it encourages two-way communication. Active and engaged management by doing some of that BBWA stuff that I talked about earlier. An atmosphere of trust where people actually do trust the system. They actually trust the reporting system. They trust the investigation process. Processes documented, periodically reviewed, and the SMS manual is seen as a living document because we're always looking at it and changing it, if we need to. So it's periodically reviewed. Is it still relevant? And roles and responsibilities within the SMS are understood. So these are just some. I could put down 200 things to look at here, but really the main one here is that there is open two-way communication throughout the organisation. If you remember back to Patrick Hudson's cultural ladder, informed communication, informed trust, builds trust. Indicators of an unhealthy SMS, the manual's on the shelf. Compliance only, yeah, we've got an SMS, we've got a manual, we're right to go. Punitive post-incident actions, where we focus too much on the who and not enough on the why. There's no clarity around roles and responsibilities. Position descriptions are vague, ambiguous. No periodic review of any SMS, and a poor reporting culture. No feedback, no follow-up. No allocation of resources for the SMS. So there are some indicators of an unhealthy SMS. Now, before I follow up, is that I was going to chat just quickly when I talk about reporting, is that RAAUS typically every year get 300 reports. Out of those 300 reports, 90%, approximately 80 to 90%, are mandatory reports. So they must report anyway. Now, when you break that down, if there's 160 flying schools that operate under the RAAUS banner as well as private operators, that's 1.875 reports per year per flying school. So I'll say that again, that's 1.875 reports per flying school per year. There's something wrong here. Again, we need to discuss why there is a lack of reports. Is it that people don't want to report? There's a fear of retribution, it's too hard to report, or people just don't know what to report. And this is the barrier that we need to overcome. When I start talking about SMS, I say report everything, report anything. And fairly soon there will be a filter applied to say, okay, we've heard enough about that side of it. We need to focus more on the aviation hazard side of the house. And the reason for this is that RAAUS require the data. They need to sift through the data to find out what are the trends. Now, we have trends in loss of control in flight. Regrettably, there's 63% of fatalities are caused by loss of control in flight. So I would like to think in your hazard and risk registers, there's your number one hazard, is loss of control in flight. What are you doing about it? And how many times have you been in an aircraft or on a flight line and you go, oh, phew, that almost bit me. I'm glad I, saved the day or whatever, but then didn't report that. Others can learn from our mistakes. Others can learn from a near miss. So, there is definitely room for improvement in the reporting side. And if we can focus a little bit more there and getting that information back to the head shed, they will get the data and then they'll be able to identify other areas which we need to focus on. Okay. So it's just some final thoughts as I wrap up. SMS is evolving. I've been involved in SMS now since 2002 formally, and there have been changes and there are more changes coming. And we've seen that with the legislation that's being drummed out through the regulator. Safety should be seen as investment, not a cost. There's much more to SMS than just compliance. When the regulator comes to look at your SMS or the RAAUS SMS, they will not only be looking at compliance, but they'll also be looking at performance. So how are you judging the performance of your SMS? What metrics have you got in place to measure your safety performance? There's much more to SMS than just the manual. And when I start talking about culture, and when I start talking about management commitment, that's what I mean. There is a lot more to SMS. It's the buy-in of the people. It is getting your people involved and sold on the system that it is there to provide them with a safer working environment and protecting your brand. Any cultural change in the workplace. So I had the privilege of working for Metrojet under the Hong Kong Aviation Group in Hong Kong. I started on day one with a one-page hazard report. It took me 5 years before I had a constant stream of hazard reports. So any cultural change in the workplace takes time. If we want people to change behaviour and start reporting issues and encouraging that cultural change in changing their behaviour, it does take time. So this won't happen overnight, and I understand that. Without management commitment and a positive safety culture, an SMS is doomed to failure. You need the buy-in of the folks. Now, Patrick Hudson has left us with one final thought, which I'd like to touch on now. The greatest single barrier to smaller organisations is the belief that SMS is just too difficult. A lot of people just think of an SMS as this huge Encyclopedia Britannica that they've got to put together, in order to satisfy the regulator. And that's not the case. An SMS is tailored and should be flexible to suit your organisation. It needs to be flexible. So just some thoughts there. My presentation is over. Thanks very much. As I said earlier, it's a privilege, and I'm very proud to be part of National Safety Month. And I'll hand back to Cody. Thanks very much. Question. Is there any data to suggest accident rates are lower with an SMS in place as opposed to when it was not a requirement? That's an excellent question. The simple answer I have for you is that, and this is, thanks Paul for your question. The ATSB in 2012 did some research around SMS. Will an SMS improve safety? Simple question. And there was no definitive yes or no. But what there was a definitive yes for was that a well-implemented and resourced SMS, therefore you can draw the conclusion that there was significant management commitment and the buy-in of the people, improved efficiency of the organisation. So you can draw the parallel between efficiency and safety. Now, with larger RPT operators, there is data through, it's not called, you've mentioned data here, but I have some figures that I'm very willing to send you. Cody has my email, which is a return on investment of SMS training or human factors training. Delta Airlines, American Airlines have absolutely proven that there has been a significant decrease in lost time due to injury, on-time performance of aircraft, and also incident accident rates by having an SMS in place. And they weren't in America, or the US, sorry. Part 5 is not in vogue yet, and yet American and Delta and United had had an SMS in place before the legislation dictated that. I hope that helps. Linda, what actions assist to tip an organisation from reactive to more proactive SMS practices, ideas or examples? Very, very good question. I think we all start reactive. When something happens, we need to do something about it. But on the Hudson graph, that Hudson cultural ladder, if we keep our people more informed, then we build the trust in our processes are taken up, and we start using the system. So what I would do from going to try to tip from reactive to more proactive, first of all, you need to have the systems in place. Second of all, you need to get your people involved in them. So if you do let's just say a hazard identification workshop, well, how about we get, if we're talking about a flying school, how about we get the CFI, 2 line pilots and have 2 students, sit them in a room and say, okay, well, we're talking about flying area ABC over here. What are the major hazards that you face? And just get people involved, and they're involved in the process. And then you can say, well, okay, what processes should we put in place to mitigate those risks? They'll come up with some ideas, put those ideas into practice, and you start to build that the conversation. So you get people, you get the buy-in. Can I just say, Linda, it's not easy. We've all got egos, particularly in aviation. I think we've got more than most. But it's that gentle pressure in the right direction that actually does build this. So getting people involved is the big one. What I did in Hong Kong, I had one of the local Hong Kong guys help me to design the hazard report with Cantonese subtitles. And all of a sudden, you know, that started taking off. So it's not a bad thing to be reactive, okay? It's a step up from being, well, we don't care. The next step is a big one, to start putting the system in place, but then to start looking forwards. And if you have a hazard identification workshop, that's being proactive. If you say we're going to build, or we're going to get a new, I don't know, a new piece of equipment for the hangar, or a new aircraft type, or we're going to go from 50 students to 150 students, and you implement a management of change process, you're doing that proactively. So you're using the system that you have to look forwards. But if you get people involved and they see that the system is actually there to assist them, because we're adults, right? What's in it for me is going to be the question everybody asks. So I hope that points you in the right direction. Paul, does the regulator require you to add their requirements to your SMS now and into the future? Well, under 149, if you have an SMS already, the funny thing is when I go and speak to organisations that don't have an SMS, they actually have about 70% of it. They just don't realise it. So what I would say to you is your SMS must conform to CASA's SMS requirements. That will be the 4 components and 15 elements. Now, what you can do if you have an SMS already, if you can hyperlink to each one, or you cut and paste what you have already underneath each of the elements that they require, then that will satisfy the requirement. The big thing is that compliance means, regrettably, that you must have these things in place. So, for example, one of the elements is safety accountabilities of managers. Okay, so what are the safety accountabilities of managers? And you may have position descriptions in the HR department that outline that. Well, you can link to that. You might already have an emergency response plan. You might already have a hazard reporting system. But what they will look for is, okay, what SMS induction training do you do under safety promotion? Because there's an element down there which is training and education. So what SMS training do you do? Where is it? Can you show me the training records? So you need to provide that evidence. So have a look at the 149 requirements for SMS, which are the 4 components, 15 elements, and then dovetail your material into that to satisfy the regulator. Who is Patrick Hudson? Okay, another good question. Thanks, Paul. At the beginning, I mentioned just after the agenda, I had some references. And Patrick Hudson is the Professor of Human Factors at Delft University in the Netherlands. He, along with James Reason, Professor James Reason, were responsible for the safety case report that they put together after the Piper Alpha event in 1989.
Thank you very much, Mike. And
you're welcome.
I've actually got a couple of questions myself because they're things that we come up across. But how can a single instructor organisation meet their SMS requirements without having a bunch of other staff to consult with, or without necessarily having a lot of occurrences if they've got low volume of training?
Yeah, so it's not easy, and a lot of it would need to be. Are they under the RAAUS banner?
Yeah, absolutely. So a number of our schools might be single
Yep.
CFI schools who
Yep.
operate as a part-time or weekend business,
Okay.
and it's often more difficult for them.
Yep. So that's where the head shed, you will provide that for them. So you have the SMS that you've already put out to the flying schools. So a single pilot, CFI, can't do a safety investigation on himself. He can certainly raise a report, but then who will do the investigation? And will he assess that as being investigatable or not? So that's where you need to assume that responsibility on their behalf. So they will have some records, like training records, an emergency response plan. They'll have a safety policy. Most of the other stuff there, Cody, needs to be picked up probably by RAAUS. That's something to clarify with the 149 group crew within the regulator. But certainly they can't do a safety investigation on themselves. So that side of it needs to be outsourced. So who would you outsource that to? Well, to me, the logical person to point to would be the head shed in RAAUS.
Absolutely, fair enough. And one more for you. Another common response that we come up across when we're out and about out in the field is the response of, well, I've been doing this for 30 years. I haven't had an accident yet. Why do I need an SMS now? What would be your response to that?
Yeah, you're not the only one. I face this a lot of the time. That, listen, mate, I've been flying for 70 years. I know boats, and my answer is, well, there by the grace of God go you. But someone else, if you don't turn up for work one day and you want someone else to go and operate your aircraft or whatever, how are they going to do that? I mentioned earlier that an SMS does provide corporate memory. It's how you go about doing business. So what are the hazards associated with your organisation? Who should they call in the event of an emergency? So it provides that rigour. And at the end of the day, again, it comes back to protecting your brand. If people think that they don't need to document stuff and they don't need to go through this rigmarole, then I guess there's not too much we can do about it except reinforce the message. And as I said earlier, it's just gentle pressure in the right direction. It's aviation law. It's legislation that anyone under 149, which comes under the banner of RAAUS as a self-administrative organisation, is required to have an SMS. And you, as the organisation, need to provide that oversight to ensure that these folks actually implement what you need them to implement. Otherwise, if you lose that 149 certification, then it's a big, deal breaker for a business.
Yeah, absolutely, and I am very proud that we've been able to effectively get all of our schools now implemented with an SMS. However, this is certainly part of a bigger picture of really enabling our schools and assisting them with why this is now a suitable and an appropriate means of managing safety for them, rather than just something that is a tick box exercise that sits on the shelf. And how can it really assist their business?
Yeah.
So yeah, really, thank you.
Well, it is the way they go about it. It's the way they go about doing their business. This becomes a day-to-day thing. And like I say, I was talking to two guys in Kununurra that had a crop dusting business, and we sat down and did a gap analysis on what they actually had and what they actually needed for an SMS, and they had 80% of it already in place. A lot of the stuff they just didn't really document. They had safety meetings in a diary, which is great, and they had who was going to do what when, so there was action items that came out of those meetings. Well, a diary is fine to do that. They didn't have a safety manager, but they managed safety between them. And so all they need to do is actually, document that to highlight who is responsible for what. So it's not an overly onerous process to go through if you keep it simple. What I find with a lot of small organisations is that they want all of the bells and whistles, and whereas it just confuses people. It's just, excuse me, too complex for what they're trying to do. So keep it simple.
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly key. And certainly if we can do anything to assist schools, certainly reach out to us at safety@raus.com.au. Myself and our team will always be happy to help out. But just touching on briefly a couple of points that you raised throughout your presentation, Mike, and one of those is that iceberg diagram in terms of the 4% of problems known to top management, and in this instance, often RAAUS. And it's all too often, unfortunately, we attend an aerodrome only to be asked what we're doing to assist with these local issues that are happening, and why haven't we got involved. And a lot of these instances, it's actually the first we've ever heard of it. So we've got our occurrence reporting system online, and you can report obviously your accidents and incidents, defects, hazards, but also complaints to RAAUS through that system. And we do encourage everybody to please report their occurrences so that we can assist and so that we can build data. And whilst we might not be able to take direct action on every report that we receive, we certainly review every report that is received. And when we start to see trends, it really enables us to provide and scope our safety communications, and also to assist our community as well. Mike also mentioned transparent investigation process, and we certainly do have a just culture at RAAUS, but if people do want to know more about our occurrence handling and our investigation process, we do have an occurrence and complaints handling manual that is available on our website for everyone to view. But also what we are looking to see, certainly from our schools when we receive reports submitted to us, and signs of a really good positive culture at these schools, is when we receive these reports, we actually want to see what the school has done about it in the first instance. And it's really nice and reassuring when we look at some of these reports to go in and see, since this review or this occurrence, we've sat down, we've reviewed this process, we've put these steps into place in order to enable us to resolve that and prevent it from happening again. Unfortunately, from time to time, we do see examples of some poor or compromised safety culture within some of our flight training schools. And a couple of examples of these might be competition between two local schools, which has resulted in a competitive nature where focus on safety is lost, and there's some competition going on between schools. We've got Mike back, but also we see occasionally
not sure what happened there.
Dropped out. We also unfortunately see a culture occasionally within schools where CFIs or senior instructors are not willing to work with other instructors or are competing with safety concerns rather than proactively working with them and discussing those in order to manage them. And one other thing, certainly in terms of risks and hazards at local schools, and one thing that you actually pointed out to us originally, Mike, very relevant to our flight training schools and worthy of adding to your risk register and hazard register, is the UK CAA Significant 7, which covers the 7 key ways that pilots essentially die. We're not finding new ways of having fatal accidents, and they've broken down those to 7 significant areas, which are controlled flight into terrain, airborne conflict, runway overrun or excursion, loss of control, runway incursions, ground handling, and fire, which may be airborne or post-crash. And certainly, if you compare the RAAUS statistics to that UK Significant 7, there is a lot of alignment with some of the key hazards and concerns that we see within RAAUS and within our data to those Significant 7. So that would certainly be worthy of review for school hazard and risk registers within your local operations. So on that note, Mike, thank you again very much for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure and very valuable for our flight training organisations.
Thanks, Cody. No, I really appreciate the time. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon. And for the rest of our members, please do stay involved in our Safety Month initiatives. Next week we are focusing on loss of control, and we do have another live stream scheduled for next week and a new range of content available that is online from Monday at 9 a.m. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors for joining us and sponsoring National Safety Month in order to provide the fantastic giveaways that we've got throughout the month of October. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will certainly catch you next week, Wednesday, same time, for our final live stream event.